April 30th, 1945, 6 a.m., Interior Ministry Building, northwestern edge of Königsplatz, Berlin. Captain Stepan Neustroyev hunches over his maps in the captured shell of what the Soviets call Himmler's house, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Through the shattered windows, he can see the objective, a massive gray building looming across the square through curtains of smoke and brick dust. He turns to his regimental superior, perplexed. "Comrade, what is that building between us and our objective?" "Neustroyev," comes the reply. "That is the Reichstag." What Neustroyev doesn't know, what none of the young Soviet battalion commanders preparing for the assault can fully comprehend, is that they're about to fight for a building that hasn't functioned as a government center in 12 years, a political symbol that Stalin has transformed into the ultimate prize of the European war. Within 18 hours, this imposing structure will become the site of the most savage room-to-room combat in the Battle of Berlin. Over 30 hours of fighting that will cost thousands of lives for a building already rendered meaningless by 12 years of Nazi rule. The mathematics of desperation are already in motion. 550 German defenders, many prepared to die rather than surrender. Against them, 2.5 million Soviet troops encircling the city, with 3 rifle divisions focused on this single objective. The outcome is inevitable, but the price will be paid in blood, measured in bodies that will never be counted, in a battle for a symbol that means everything and nothing. By April 1945, the war in Europe is decided. American, British, and Canadian forces have crossed the Rhine and are crushing Germany from the west. The Soviets, having paid for every mile with mountains of their dead, have crossed the Oder River and now surround Berlin with 2.5 million men and 6,000 tanks. The Berlin operation, launched on April 16th, was meant to be the final act. But the Germans, defending the Seelow Heights 60 kilometers east of the city, made the Soviets pay dearly. 66,000 Red Army soldiers fell in just 4 days of fighting for that single ridgeline. But captured it was. And now by April 25th, Berlin is completely surrounded. Inside the encirclement, 2.5 million civilians, living mostly underground, trapped with the remnants of Hitler's dying Reich. Long gone are the days of triumphant processions down the Unter den Linden. The city is a shattered moonscape of rubble and smoke. The race to Berlin has been personal for the Soviet commanders. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, commanding the 1st Belarusian Front from the north, believes the honor of capturing the city is his. But Stalin has been playing his generals against each other. Marshal Ivan Konev, commanding the 1st Ukrainian Front from the south, has been ordered to drive for Berlin as well. Zhukov's army has suffered the most. The brutal fight at Seelow Heights has bled his forces white, but he's closest to the ultimate prize, the Reichstag building, and Stalin has made it abundantly clear what he wants. The hammer and sickle flying over the Reichstag by May 1st, International Workers' Day. Not a request, an order. Let's understand what the attackers are facing. Berlin in 1945 is a nightmare for assault troops. The city is crisscrossed by canals and the Spree River, linked by bridges that have become choke points of death. Wide streets are lined with tall buildings, every window a potential firing position. Tanks advancing without infantry support face certain destruction. The city has been hastily divided into defensive zones. The Saar Zone, or Zitadelle, the citadel, forms the final bastion around the government quarter. Within this zone lie the key buildings. The Gestapo headquarters on Prince Albrechtstrasse, Hermann Göring's massive air ministry, the old and new Reich Chancellery, and 9 meters beneath it, Hitler's Führerbunker. And north of all this, across the Spree River, the Reichstag. The Reichstag itself is imposing. Opened in 1894 to house the German parliament, it stands 47 meters tall, 154 feet, inspired by Memorial Hall in Philadelphia. After the fire of 1933, Hitler never used it. For 12 years it has stood empty, a relic of a democracy destroyed. But now, for defense, it has been transformed. Most windows and doors are bricked up with loopholes left for weapons. Sandbags are piled against its thick walls. Machine guns nest in the corner towers and above the main entrance. The building's sturdy construction has absorbed relentless bombing without collapse. To understand the final assault, we need to see the Königsplatz, today called the Platz der Republik. In 1945, it looks nothing like the peaceful tourist destination it will become. In the center of the square, a flooded construction pit, abandoned U-Bahn subway works that are filled with water, creating a natural tank trap and defensive barrier directly in front of the Reichstag. To the west, the ruins of the Kroll Opera House, still in German hands, bristling with weapons. To the south, the Interior Ministry, which the Soviets will capture first, giving them a foothold. And to the north, beyond the Reichstag, across the Moltke Bridge, the key to everything. The bridge itself, only partially destroyed by German demolition attempts, crosses the Spree River. On the far side, the shattered diplomatic quarter and the ruins of Lehrter Bahnhof railway station. And 2 kilometers away, in the Berlin Zoo, the real nightmare. 3 massive flak towers, armed with 128mm anti-aircraft guns, encased in reinforced concrete so thick that no bomb can penetrate. Guns designed to shoot down 4-engine bombers at 20,000 feet can now be turned horizontally, firing directly down the streets and into the square. They will make the Moltke Bridge a killing ground. The German defense of the Reichstag sector falls to SS Brigadeführer Wilhelm Mohnke, commanding the entire government quarter, Sector Z. His forces are a mixture of elite and desperate. The core, 800 men from the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal guard battalion. 800 more from the SS bodyguard unit, 600 from the Reichsführer SS Guard Battalion, Himmler's personal troops, a handful of French SS from the 33rd Waffen Grenadier Division Charlemagne, remnants of the shattered 11th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Nordland. Commanding the Reichstag's immediate defense, SS Obersturmführer Gerhard Babik of the LSSAH. He has approximately 300 men concentrated in and around the building itself, most from the 11th Company, 3rd Battalion, 250 Kriegsmarine sailors sent by Grand Admiral Dönitz as an honor guard for the Reich Chancellery, a job now utterly meaningless. 100 Volkssturm, the home guard, old men and boys. And later he'll receive 100 paratroopers from the decimated 9th Fallschirmjäger Division. Heavy weapons are limited. Babik has positioned 2 88mm flak guns outside the Reichstag, firing in the ground roll. But his real advantage is constant radio contact with the Zoo flak tower, whose 128mm guns can devastate any target in the square. These men know what awaits them. Death or captivity in Soviet hands. For SS troops, often the same thing. Most are prepared to sell their lives dearly, but not all share this determination. Among the defenders is Gunter Debski, a young conscript assigned to a penal battalion after attempting to desert. He finds himself positioned on the south side of the Reichstag on April 30th. April 28th, 1945. The 3rd Shock Army, part of Zhukov's 1st Belarusian front, arrives from the north. The 150th Rifle Division lines up along the Spree River. Their first objective, the Moltke Bridge. The Germans have mined and barricaded it. Machine guns and anti-tank weapons in the Interior Ministry and diplomatic quarter overlook every meter of its span. It's a killing ground by design. At approximately 2 p.m., under a wreath of heavy smoke covering the entire city, the first Soviet assault begins. The result is catastrophic. Withering fire from multiple positions cuts down the lead troops. A German counterattack pushes the survivors back across the bridge. Soviet casualties mount rapidly, but the Red Army has learned not to quit. By evening, they're ready to try again. This time, armor leads. Several enormous IS-2 Stalin heavy tanks rumble onto the bridge, their 122mm guns returning fire, then massive explosions. According to SS soldier Willy Rogman, the leading tanks simply disintegrated. The cause, the Zoo flak tower. The 128mm guns, with perfect sight lines, can see every meter of the bridge. At this range, less than 2 kilometers, a direct hit from a 128mm shell doesn't just damage a tank. It obliterates it. Between attacks, the Germans attempt to fully demolish the bridge. The explosives only partially succeed. A narrow strip of roadway remains, still crossable by tanks. The 3rd attempt succeeds through sheer volume of fire. Under cover of artillery that literally shakes the earth, Red Army tanks force their way across. Infantry begins clearing the diplomatic quarter and Interior Ministry, building by building, room by room. The fighting is savage. In the Interior Ministry, success comes down to a single ground floor window. Soviet troops pour through this opening, thousands of men passing through one window frame over the course of hours, until by dawn on April 29th, the area is secure. The route to the Reichstag is open. Inside the Interior Ministry, on the evening of April 29th, Vladimir Pereverzev writes a letter to his wife by candlelight. His hands shake, not from fear alone, but from the vodka that all the men are drinking. He writes, "So far I am alive and healthy, only I am slightly drunk the whole time. But this is necessary to keep up your courage. I am just 500 meters from the Reichstag. We have already crossed the Spree, and in a few days the Fritzes and the Hanses will be kaput. You write that part of the kitchen ceiling collapsed, but that's nothing. A 6-story building collapsed on us, and we had to dig our boys out. This is how we live and beat the Germans." Pereverzev doesn't mention in his letter what everyone knows, that Stalin himself is watching this battle, that radio reports go directly to Moscow, that commanders are being promised glory or threatened with disgrace based on capturing one building. At 2:30 p.m. on April 30th, someone, the historical record never reveals who, transmits a report that a red banner has been seen flying from the Reichstag. The message goes up the chain of command to Zhukov, to Moscow, to Stalin's desk. It's a mistake, a potentially fatal one for those responsible. When the error is discovered, the commanders face a terrible choice: admit the error to Stalin or make it true before he discovers the lie. They choose the latter. The pressure becomes unbearable. Multiple banner parties are formed, each carrying a red flag with orders to reach the roof at all costs. Someone even suggests dropping a banner from an aircraft. The attempt fails, time is running out. May 1st, May Day, is approaching. The attack must succeed. Now, April 30th, 1945, 4:30 a.m. The first assault across the 280 meters of open ground begins. Today, it's a peaceful 5-minute stroll. In 1945, for a few hours, it's the most heavily contested stretch of ground in Europe. The Soviets move forward under cover of smoke and the brick dust from continuous shelling. They make it perhaps 50 meters before German fire stops them cold. Machine guns from the Reichstag, more fire from the Kroll Opera House behind them, artillery from across the Tiergarten, and dominating everything, the methodical thunder of the Zoo Flak Tower's 128mm guns. The attack collapses. Men scramble back to the Interior Ministry, leaving their dead in the square. 11:30 a.m. second attempt. More smoke, more artillery preparation. The same result, driven back by overwhelming fire. The Zoo Flak Tower guns alone are destroying any hope of a direct assault. 2:30 p.m. third attempt. This time the Soviets bring up massive concentrations of field artillery. 90 guns, from tanks to howitzers, are positioned around the Interior Ministry. Some are even placed on the upper floors for clearer fields of fire. Katyusha rocket launchers set up in the courtyard, firing directly at the building. The bombardment is awe-inspiring. The ground itself shakes. Dust and acrid smoke blot out the sun. To the men waiting to attack, it feels like the apocalypse has arrived. When the barrage lifts, the 150th Division attacks again. This time, they manage to knock out several key positions, possibly including the 88mm guns defending the Reichstag's front. They reach the flooded U-Bahn construction pit. Halfway there, halfway to go. But they can advance no further. The fire is simply too intense. SS Obersturmführer Babik, commanding the Reichstag's defense, puts in a desperate call for armored support. Against all odds, he receives it. Several Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns and one massive King Tiger tank from SS Division Nordland arrive at the south side of the Reichstag. Inside the King Tiger, Georg Diers. In his memoir, he recalls, "The Reichstag building was already badly bombed, the plenary hall burned out. At the front of the building, we looked over to the Kroll Opera building and saw a large number of T-34s sitting to our right, about 30 of them, their gun barrels pointing at the Reichstag building at us. After a thorough briefing of the crew, we dared to race around the corner and opened fire on this large number, with success. One King Tiger against 30 T-34s. For a moment, German tactical brilliance prevails. Several Soviet tanks are destroyed or damaged, the attack falters, but one tank, even a King Tiger, can never hold against what's coming. More and more Soviet armor pours across the Moltke Bridge and the newly captured Kronprinzenbrücke to the northeast. The northern flank of the Königsplatz falls to Soviet control. The noose tightens. 6 p.m., April 30th, 1945. Darkness comes early, aided by the smoke and dust from non-stop bombardment. Soviet commanders decide they have enough cover. After a short, intense barrage, the final assault begins. 2 battalions of the 151st Division, interspersed with tanks, including 1 British-supplied Valentine tank that has somehow survived the entire journey from the Urals to Berlin, begin their advance. The battle is bloody and hard-fought, but darkness has neutralized the Germans' advantage in heavy weapons and machine guns. Visibility is measured in meters. The red tide surges forward. Inside the Reichstag, the defenders wait. Leibstandarte SS troops who know there is no retreat. Kriegsmarine sailors far from any ocean. Volkssturm men who should be home with their grandchildren. French SS who chose the wrong side of history. Pranksters among the defenders have taken fallen statue heads from the roof and placed them on ledges at ground level, creating a surreal graveyard of stone faces staring at the approaching Soviets. But the Red Army has learned its lessons in weeks of street fighting. A war correspondent attached to the assault battalion describes being pulled before his sergeant. Terrified he's being sent away, he approaches with dread. The sergeant simply takes his pistol and hands him a PPSH submachine gun. "Anyone going inside the Reichstag will need one of these," the old soldier says simply. Soviet troops reach the steps. Between the columns, the doorways have been bricked up. But the assault troops have brought 2 light mortars. They position them as horizontally as physics allows and fire point blank into the barricades. The bricks explode. Infantry pours through the gap. Inside the main hall, they're met by a hail of submachine gun fire from surrounding rooms and from Leibstandarte troops on the balconies above, throwing grenades and firing Panzerfäuste down into the packed Soviet formation. One Soviet soldier will later recall that the large columns beside the entrance became completely covered in blood within minutes. Fighting spills into adjoining rooms. Hand-to-hand combat erupts as soldiers grapple in the darkness, lit only by muzzle flashes and the fires that have begun spreading through the ground floor. The foremost battalion has carried its own banner into the building. This flag becomes a rallying point as men try to fight their way to the roof. The Soviets clear the initial rooms and reach the large staircases. Here, the battle becomes truly savage. Both Soviet and German troops use the massive stone banisters for cover, firing through them at brutally close range. Grenades bounce off marble. Panzerfaust rockets fired indoors create overpressure that ruptures eardrums. The defenders split. Some retreat to the basement's multiple levels, others fight upward floor by floor. The regimental banner, the standard of the attacking unit, is carried up the stairs through a storm of fire. It reaches the 2nd floor before the men carrying it are pinned down by a machine gun positioned to cover the corridor. Some soldiers make it into the first rooms, but can advance no further. Field telephones are set up to communicate with the anxious General Shatilov, whose entire career now depends on getting a flag on that roof. Radios don't function properly in the massive concrete structure. When Shatilov learns his men have reached the 2nd floor, he gives the order. Special banner party number 5 is sent in. The banner they carry is ceremonial, a large hammer and sickle emblem designed specifically to be photographed as proof of Soviet victory. But inside the Reichstag, in near total darkness, filled with smoke and the constant crack of gunfire echoing off stone, the banner party is lost. They've never been in this building before. They have no idea where they're going. It takes precious time just to find the staircase to the 2nd floor. Once there, Communist Party members Sergeants Meliton Kantaria and Mikhail Yegorov use the chaos of the ongoing firefight as cover, while other Soviet troops and remaining Banner Party members provide suppressing fire. They slip along the corridor to the rear stairs leading to the roof. The official Soviet history states that it was exactly 10:50 p.m. on April 30th when Kantaria and Yegorov planted their banner on the roof of the Reichstag, flying the hammer and sickle over the defeated Third Reich, just in time to meet Stalin's May Day deadline. The reality is different. When Kantaria and Yegorov finally reach the roof, gasping for breath, hearts pounding, expecting a moment of triumph, they find they're not alone. A competing banner party is already there, led by non-party member Captain V.N. Markov and his artillerymen. Their banner is already wedged into the victory statue in the center of the roof. The time is well past midnight. May 1st has already arrived. But Markov's banner party are not Communist Party members. When the history books are written, this will simply not do. The official story will celebrate Kantaria and Yegorov. They will receive their Hero of the Soviet Union medals and be immortalized in Soviet propaganda. Markov and his men will be written out of history. The banner is on the roof, but the Reichstag is far from captured. Fighting continues throughout May 1st and into May 2nd. The layout of the building becomes a nightmare, a labyrinth of small and large rooms, extending both above and below ground, with wide staircases, hundreds of individual chambers, and fires burning in multiple locations. The battle descends into room-to-room, hand-to-hand combat for hours on end. Soviet troops eventually drive a wedge through the German defenses by controlling the ground floor, forcing surviving Germans either up to the upper floors or down into the multi-story basement. Artillery becomes involved even in this close-range fighting. Soviet guns shell the upper floors, German guns outside target the ground floor. The building shakes with explosions. Gunter Debski, the young conscript who had been ordered to defend the south side, manages to slip away during the chaos. His commanding officer, who had ordered him to approach the Soviets with a white flag earlier that day, is killed moments after giving the order. Debski considers the order invalid and retreats. He will survive the war. Others are not so fortunate. Despite the hammer and sickle flying above, the last pockets of die-hard German resistance in the Reichstag fight on until May 2nd. Finally, out of ammunition and completely surrounded, they surrender. All told, the fight inside the Reichstag lasts more than 30 hours. By the time the last shots are fired, all defenders of Berlin are emerging from basements and buildings into a shattered, dust-filled city, surrendering to the waiting victors. On the roof of the Reichstag, Soviet photographer Yevgeny Kaldey stages what will become perhaps the most famous photograph of World War II. Taken probably on May 2nd, days after the first banners actually flew, it shows a Red Army soldier raising the hammer and sickle over the ruins of Berlin. The image is later edited, one detail removed, a second watch worn by one of the soldiers in frame, a small but important detail that alludes to the widespread looting and far darker episodes taking place across the city. Stories for another day, the statistics are sobering but imprecise. In the battle for Berlin as a whole, 80,000 to 100,000 Soviet soldiers killed, 100,000 German troops killed, perhaps 20,000 civilians dead. For the Reichstag specifically, Soviet casualties recorded for just April 30th to May 1st list 154 killed and 312 wounded. These numbers represent just 2 days of combat around a single building. German casualties of several hundred killed and wounded pale beside the strategic futility. They died defending a building that had been politically dead for 12 years. In the days following the fighting, the Reichstag becomes a pilgrimage site for Soviet soldiers. Thousands chalk and carve their names into the walls, marking their presence, their survival, their victory. The graffiti remains when the first Western journalists arrived to document the battle that ended Nazi Germany. Transformation from mockery to monument took less than a month. On April 8th, German pilots had laughed at what they called flying milk bottles, the American P-47 Thunderbolts. Within months, those same Germans spoke of the aircraft in hushed, terrified tones. The Battle of the Reichstag followed a different arc, but arrived at the same destination. The Germans had transformed a defunct parliament building into a fortress. They manned it with elite SS troops, supported it with the most powerful anti-aircraft guns in their arsenal, and defended it with everything they had left. They held for 30 hours against overwhelming force, and it meant nothing, because by April 30th, 1945, less than a kilometer away in the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, at approximately 3:20 p.m., while Soviet troops were still fighting their way across the Königsplatz, Adolf Hitler ended his life with a gunshot. His 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and died with him in a concrete tomb. The men fighting and dying for the Reichstag on both sides didn't know this yet. They continued killing each other for a symbol that represented a government that no longer existed, serving a leader who was already dead. Within months, Berlin would become the center of a new conflict, the Cold War, and remain so for 5 decades. The Reichstag itself would sit in ruins until after German reunification in 1990, when it was finally restored. Today, Berlin has changed beyond recognition. The signs that war passed through in 1945 are few, but if you look beneath the surface of the modern buildings and skyscrapers, you can still find them. The battle-damaged griffin that once adorned the Moltke Bridge, the last remnants of Soviet graffiti on the Reichstag's roof, the memorials commemorating the thousands who fell here, and in museums, the testimony of the men who were there. Soviet veterans who speak of the fear and vodka and the way buildings collapsed on their comrades. German veterans who describe the hopelessness of the final days, when courage without resources became, as one put it, just delayed defeat. The Battle of the Reichstag was fought for a political symbol that Stalin needed more than any military objective. The cost was paid in the bodies of young men who deserved better than to die for propaganda. The hammer and sickle flew over the Reichstag on May 1st, 1945, the date Stalin demanded. But the price of meeting that deadline was measured in blood that soaked into the Königsplatz, in the screams of wounded men in the Reichstag's burning halls, in the bodies that filled the Spree River. They fought for a building. What they won was ashes and memory. The thunder had spoken, and Berlin belonged to the victors.